Good morning and good afternoon for those who join us today. Welcome to the webinar in the framework of the official launching of the report towards universal access to higher education, international trends, carried out by the UNESCO International Institute for Higher Education in Latin America and the Caribbean, EISALC. On behalf of the Institute Director, Francesc Pedró, and his work team, we thank you for joining us today. Today's program will start with welcoming words by Francesc Pedró, followed by the presentation of the report on access to higher education by its research coordinator, Daniele Vieira. Next on the agenda, UNESCO delegates will share relevant information regarding access to higher education in their respective regions, in dialogue with the report that we are officially launching. After the exchange of ideas, the audience is welcome to submit questions through the Zoom chat. Today's event will close with final remarks by Francesc Pedró. We also count on the participation of visual translator Frank Salomon, creator of Dilo con Monos, who will capture the information of this meeting and translate it into visual diagrams. This will help us to better understand and see the big picture of the context presented. We will share the outcome of her work before leaving the room. Before starting today's program, we invite the panelists to keep their microphones off when not participating. We take the opportunity to announce that this event has simultaneous translation to Spanish. Para los que no hablan inglés, el evento está siendo traducido al español y pueden cambiar al canal de español en los botones que están en la barra inferior. If you need translation, please select the Spanish channel on the translation button below. We also remind you that this event will be recorded and later released on the UNESCO IESALC YouTube channel. We start with today's program by welcoming UNESCO IESALC Director, Francesc Pedró. Director, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Muy buenos días para los que están en América. Good morning, good afternoon, even good evening for some colleagues now connecting from Asia. It is really a pleasure for us to have you aboard, either if you are a participant or a panelist. Maybe I should start by saying a few things, trying to explain why the Institute has, in a way, taken the initiative to work on this wonderful concept of universal access to higher education. There are basically two main reasons, maybe two and a half. Let me explain. The first reason is because equity and inclusion, which is another way of looking at equity, is one of our 5 priorities set by the Institute's governing board for the biennium. Now, we know very well that in our international conversations about higher education over the past decade or even more, the focus has been on quality or the lack of quality or the ways in which different mechanisms can help the higher education sector to assure quality. Yet, equity, which has one of its expressions on access, has been missing from our international conversation. Actually, we at the Institute are convinced that a lot of efforts on equity in education miss the point because they do not consider at all the importance of higher education. In other words, it looks like in the international cooperation agenda in education, higher education as a sector is absolutely absent, and we need to change that. So that's the first reason. The second reason is because we can already anticipate that the growing trend towards universal access in higher education or to higher education will be damage has already been damaged, hampered by the today's pandemic. I think that we have already very good indications in a number of countries that have already reopened their universities and higher education institutions, where we can see that somewhere between 3 and 15% of students that were already there in the past month of February never returned. Of course, this has a very important, I would say, implication for equity, because it is not a set of random students, the ones that do not return. They are mostly students that are either women or coming from vulnerable groups. And I think that it is important for UNESCO to express its voice, just reminding countries and reminding institutions of the importance to look at the effects of the pandemic also on access to higher education. And finally, I said that there was a kind of a half reason. And the half reason, which is personally for me, maybe one of the most important ones today, is that it provides, I mean, this webinar provides us with an excellent opportunity to be with colleagues working in other regions, also supporting the work that both governments and institutions are doing in higher education. In that respect, I would like really to express my personal gratitude to my colleagues in Beirut, and I can already anticipate that my colleague Anasse Bouhlal may have some trouble. As you may remember, there was a very important incident or accident in the Beirut's harbor, and so electricity cuts are constant. I would like also to mention my colleague Libing Wang, who is joining us from Bangkok in Thailand, and who is one of the leading experts along with Anasse on higher education at UNESCO. And we have been also joined by José Antonio Quinteiro, who will be presenting, who is a member of the Institute and who will be presenting the Latin American perspective. We're still missing our colleague from Africa, but I hope that everything going well, he should be with us soon. So these are the 3 reasons, I have to say, why we decided to go ahead. I'm very much excited about knowing how you react from your regional perspective, how you react to the ideas that my colleague, Daniele Vieira dos Santos, is going to present. I would like to finalize my introduction simply saying that this is the first outcome of the newly created analytical team at UNESCO's Institute for Higher Education. We have at the moment a team of 8 people, which is working in a number of areas. And the first one that has been produced has been precisely this one on universal access to higher education. I think that you will be hearing more from us in the coming months. And certainly, let me once again express our absolute disposition to work with colleagues in other regions as well. With that said, thank you very much, and I hope that you find this webinar really interesting. I'm sure I will. Thank you very much. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Director. We now give the floor to Daniele Vieira, Research Coordinator of the report Towards Universal Access to Higher Education, International Trends. Daniele holds a PhD in Social Sciences from the University of Hamburg, Germany. She was a program specialist for the education sector at UNESCO and is currently a policy analyst at UNESCO IESALC. Previous work experience includes the University of California, the UN Climate Change Secretariat, and the Cluster of Excellence CLISAP in Germany. Over to you, Danielle.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I have a PPT presentation here, so I'm sharing my screen. And I would like you please to confirm. If you could confirm that everyone can see it, and then I can start my presentation. Yes, Nils has already confirmed. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah, for the nice introduction. I'm going to be presenting here some key messages, some key aspects that we have identified as part of the development of this report, on the aspect of access to higher education. I would like to greet the other panelists of this important webinar, our colleagues, the UNESCO delegates who are joining us here today, and also the audience who has taken the time, of course, to join us for this event. And I also would like to acknowledge the other members, my colleagues and other members of the analytical team, Taco Mutizi and Jaime Chinchilla, who are also here and have done an excellent work developing this report. So we have developed a report on the topic of access to higher education, highlighting some international trends in the time frame of the past 20 years. And then the objective of the report was not only to map what was these emerging trends or international trends, but also a first attempt to analyze those trends. And for that, we have developed the report around three main areas of action. The first one was to see the progression of the access, right? If it has increased and how it has increased among the regions, across the regions over the past 2 decades. The last 20 years was the time frame used. We also analyzed the policies that have effectively promoted access to higher education, if there were policies and what kind of policies have been developing and their impacts. And we also had the first exercise to see the effect of the increased access in 3 elements, which we find very important for the aspect of higher education, which is quality, equity, and the performance of the institutions. So then I'm going to be starting here with some key messages. And first of all, I would like to have a very, we bring already a very positive message here when it comes to the access. And then we have identified that the access to higher education over the past 20 years has indeed increased in all the regions. We have now more than 1/3 of the global population which continue with some sort of post-secondary study. And if we look, for example, in the first decade of the 2000s, we see that the participation rates in those institutions, they have increased around 10 percentage points in most of the regions. So we have a very positive scenario when we come into look into the global data. Here, you will see an infographic that shows this very much in detail, showing what was the increase in enrollment per region. And then the report clearly shows that from 2000 until 2018, I know I said we are using a 20-year time frame, but the last data available was from 2018. So when we look into this time frame, we can see that the enrollment has almost doubled, has basically doubled worldwide. So this is a very positive picture. Looking more specifically into the regions, we could, for example, highlight the Central and South Asia, and also East and Southeast Asia, who have seen a great increase in access. They actually being the global leaders when it comes to the expansion of global access. We also could highlight here the African region, the sub-Saharan African region, which have seen as well a doubled enrollment when we look into the time frame we use. Of course, it's still distance from the rates of the other regions. But when we look into the region specifically, although it is still very low, they have doubled the time frame in this 20 years time frame period that we have used. So this is a rather positive picture of the data that we have gathered. Another message, another key message of the report, which we also find very positive, comes to the aspect of gender. And this is also a very important message, that women have benefited more from increased access to higher education. Of course, there are differences across the regions, but for example, if we look to the Latin American region, we can highlight here that we have now in 2018, as the last data available, that we have a bit more than 1 in 2 women in the region who are accessing higher education. So this is something very positive. And also, again, we look back to Asia, right? And they are the ones who are moving faster towards the closing this, let's say, gender gap. So these are interesting data that we have identified, although some imbalances still persist when we look into the gender aspect. So women still lag behind in men in obtaining some degrees in some disciplines. When we look, for example, in science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So this is an area that needs further improvement. Chile, Ghana, and Switzerland, for example, are for instance, some countries that have these imbalances quite high. And the third message that could be highlighted regards to the income, and then here the message is not so positive. We've seen that there are some income disparities when it comes to access to higher education. The upper middle income group of countries are the ones who are accessing more or benefiting more from the increase in access to higher education. And if you look to this infographic in front of you, you will see that there is a huge difference between the low income group and the higher income group. The high income group has 77% enrollment when we look into the data in 2018, and the low income has only 10%. So this is something problematic. This is still a huge disparity. The wealthiest groups are the ones who have been benefiting more from this increase in access. So this is a data that we should keep an eye on. The report has as well looked into some drivers. This data that I have just presented, of course, they come as a result of some drivers to the increase in access. And here we have some of them highlighted to you. First of all, it's important, of course, to mention the economic development, the overall economic development that we have seen in the past 2 decades, that brings as well some sort of demand for the institutions. We need more skilled, a more skilled workforce. So of course, people tend to go to higher education more as a result of that. And this is linked as well to the aspect of the aspirations of the middle class, that they want to access more tertiary education. So this has as well served as a driver to the increase in the access. We've observed as well the growth of the private institutions. They now account for around 30% of the private enrollments, of all enrollments globally. So this is as well an important data to keep in mind, although this not necessarily come as a result of good quality in those institutions. And another driver that we have identified regards the distance education institutions that have as well seen a significant growth in the past 2 decades. Although there were some important drivers, we have identified as well some barriers that persist in regards, particularly in terms of poverty, that it's still a huge challenge in many regions, institutional barriers, particularly in terms of fees, high fees, and also entrance examinations, which impede some underprivileged groups to actually compete when taking these examinations equally with more wealthier groups. The aspect of crisis and emergency in many regions who still face this reality, and of course this hinders students from achieving higher education. The aspect of geographical mobility is as well as important to mention. We see disparities still between urban and rural areas, and as well the distribution of these institutions across the regions and inside the countries is as well a barrier sometimes. And of course, the aspect of discriminations. Many groups still face discriminations. We have highlighted here in the presentation the aspect of the accessibility for the disabled, but there are, of course, other marginalized groups who face these barriers. Some policies are also important and have been also identified, policies that countries are developing to support this access to higher education. We are here highlighting some of them. We have some other policies that were included in the report. So for example, some specific laws the countries have been developing in the past years to make sure to guarantee the right to education to everybody and avoid discrimination practices in the institutions. The admission requirements, for example, with the introduction of quotas, the specialized universities also for some underprivileged groups that have been created, the financial support to students. This is a very important aspect, right? When we look into the income infographic, we saw, I just presented that the low income groups are the ones who are not entering those institutions. So this financial support is of course very necessary in these policies. They have been advancing and providing access to higher education as well. To finalize, we have also analyzed 3 main elements, as I said in the beginning of the presentation, which was the aspect of quality, equity, and performance. And what we have, of course, this was a first attempt to analyze this correlation. And what we have identified, particularly when it comes to the aspect of quality, is that we've seen an expansion in the use of quality assurance agencies and also in the regional networks that have been created to assess the quality of the institution. So this is a positive aspect that could be highlighted here. And when it comes to equity, it still depends very much on which group we are talking about. If we are talking about gender, the dynamics between urban and rural or ethnic backgrounds, this as well varies a lot. And the dropout rates, it's still an area of concern. That means that not everybody who is enrolling those universities are actually graduating from these universities. To finalize, we have included in the report some recommendations, both for policymakers and also for the institutions themselves. For the policymakers, there are several recommendations that we could highlight. It's important, for example, that they continuously evaluate the progress. We are doing an attempt here, an exercise to do that, but it's important that the countries, they do it themselves as well, by engaging also important stakeholders. This support for these students at risk is as well a very important area, an area of concern. The revision of the equity policies to make sure that they are attending the students or the target group that needs the most support. And of course, the continuous funding support. And for the institutions, of course, there are some recommendations that we could deliver, not only financial aid, but psychological support as well to these students in need. Very important that they generate data that can be used for decision-making later on. And the use, for example, of technology. Now we are living in a pandemic period, and we can see that the institutions, they are improving a lot in the use of technology, but this, of course, can be further improved and use that as a tool to further increase access. So this was just some of the key messages that we would like to highlight with you, and they will develop in the report. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Daniele, for your presentation of the report. Next, we give the floor to the UNESCO delegates that join us today to share their views regarding access to higher education in their respective regions and based around 3 major questions. You will have 5 minutes to respond each question. We will start by welcoming Anasse Bouhlal, who is the Regional Higher Education Program Specialist for the Arab region at the UNESCO Regional Office in Beirut, Lebanon. He has been working in the field of higher education for the past 25 years in Finland and other Union countries. He's the co-founder of the Euromed University in Slovenia, and since 2008 was elected as member of its management, board, and senate. In Finland, he worked as professor at the University of Technology AS in Tampere, where he was involved in quality assurance and internationalization of higher education institutions. Bouhlal spent almost 4 years working with the Ministry of Higher Education in the Sultanate of Oman as Director of Engineering Programs. Mr. Bouhlal, we would like to invite you to share with the audience how has access to higher education progressed in the Arab countries over the past 2 decades. You will have 5 minutes to respond. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this nice introduction, and I wish also to thank my colleague Francesc Pedró and his entire crew or team for this invitation and for this brilliant collaborative approach in inviting colleagues from the region to discuss such wonderful topic. And I think concept of access is a topic which is discussed widely within the higher education colleagues nowadays, but the novelty is the word universal one. I think it makes me thinking a lot about defining this concept and how it's related to the access. Francesc had, in his introduction, gave a definition of, or the reason for the universal things, which I would thank for this. Coming back to your question, and I think the higher education in the Arab region is deeply rooted into the history and the societies. As you know, the Arabs are very proud by hosting or having the first university in the world. So this is just something what's in the Arab region is proud of it, And always when we're meeting the higher education players in the region are always coming back to the roots of the higher education in this region. For your information, the Arab region is composed of 19 countries, which are dropped into or divided in three subgroups. It's the Maghreb or the North of Africa countries, and the second one is the Mashriq, which is, as you know, the Maghreb is Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Mauritania. Then the Mashriq countries are Egypt, also Jordan, Levant countries like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, etc. And the third one is also the Gulf countries, which includes Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, etc., etc. So not forgetting, of course, Sudan, which is an African country, but is belonging to the Arab region. By saying this, the region is diversified not only geographically, but also linguistically. And this has an effect also to the higher education system. In the region, you see the Arabic-speaking countries, the French-speaking countries, and the English-speaking countries as well. In the modern history, higher education in the Arab region or the Arab countries is considered relatively recent and young. As example, on 1953, or until 1953, only 14 universities were in the region, 14 only. And the only, by saying an old university in the recent time, it's in Lebanon, it's 1866, it's named the Arab American University of Beirut, has been established here in Lebanon. To respond more explicitly to your question, and I think the Arab universities has expanded from 233 universities in 2003 to 286 universities in 2010. It means a lot. And from those 286, 153 are publics and 133 are private universities. As students' population, by 2003, it was about 5 million students enrolled in those universities. But the funny thing is that in 2017, the number of universities rose to 1,000 institutions, with students' population of 15 million students, with 250,000 faculty. So, and I think this has been also very well illustrated in your report when you took two countries as in the graphic or in the table, you choose, and I think Saudi Arabia and Morocco. And I think this really demonstrates how the changes and also the growing trends in access to higher education in the Arab region. This is for two reasons. Demographical one, because the demography in the region is very young. Please note that Egypt is one of the countries belonging to the E9 countries with 100 million inhabitants. So this is also an important factor, that the demographic factor gives us an indication that the young population in the countries in the region is very enormous. The second reason, higher education has been always seen as a factor of social and economical development. Therefore, accessing to higher education institutions or the universities has been a great demand in the region. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Professor, for showing the growing trends of higher education in the Arab region. We now would like to welcome Mr. Libing Wang.
I'm sorry, this is only the access tonight. I've got 3 questions.
Yes, we're gonna go we're gonna start with one question first,
okay.
Go around, and then we move to the next question.
Thank you.
Is that okay with you? Thanks
Absolutely.
to you. Okay. So thank you, Bouhlal, for your participation. Let's now welcome Mr. Libing Wang, currently Chief of Section for Educational Innovation and Skills Development, based at UNESCO Asia and Pacific Regional Bureau for Education in Bangkok, Thailand. His areas of responsibility with UNESCO cover higher education, teacher education, TVET, and research and foresight in Asia and the Pacific region. Prior to joining UNESCO, he was a professor of comparative education at Zhejiang University, People's Republic of China. His career in China was closely related to UNESCO, as he had served as director of UNESCO APEID Associate Center at Zhejiang University for more than 10 years. He was secretary of the Global University Network for Innovation, Asia and the Pacific, and had coordinated the operation of the regional network since its inception in 2002. He was a member of the Asia Pacific Regional Follow-up Committee to the 1998 World Conference on Higher Education and a longtime consultant to the Chinese National Commission for UNESCO. He received his doctoral degree in comparative education in 1994 from Hangzhou University, People's Republic of China. Mr. Wang, we would like to invite you to share how has access to higher education progressed in the Asia-Pacific region over the past 2 decades. You will have 5 minutes to respond. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the colleagues. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. This is Libing Wang from UNESCO Bangkok. First of all, I would like to congratulate the launch of this important publication on the universal access to higher education, which is very relevant and timely, as we all know that access, quality, and equity is the 3 major dimensions of policies concerning higher education. And they are interrelated with each other, as Danielle already mentioned. And I'm happy to see that the access issue has been, addressed again this time. If I remember correctly, the expansion of the higher education system happened first in developed countries. You can see in the 1960s in Europe, even in the United Kingdom, we have seen a great expansion of the system, the expansion of the number of universities and also the enrollment. And you all know that there's a classification of the development stage when it comes to access. We still have a criteria measured by gross enrollment ratio, which means that below 15%, we call it elite system of higher education. And then between 15 to 50, it's a massification of higher education, and above 50 is universal, right? And in this framework, we would like to see that in the past, in Asia Pacific, in the past 20 years, has been a substantial expansion of the higher education systems in almost every country. And I think I can give you a figure which are released from UIS. I think in 1980, the gross enrollment ratio for the region was less than 60%, 6%, which means that the system is very small and it's very elite. But in the year 2017, the gross enrollment ratio has been 35% at regional level, where we can see a lot of well-developed system with gross enrollment ratio much more than 50%. Maybe highest can be over 90%. So many of the systems has already reached universal access to higher education. I think this is quite impressive from Asia and the Pacific. But I would also like to draw your attention that the previous global education agenda is very much focused on basic education. As you know, Education for All was focusing on school education. And we are not with SDGs, right? And the SDG is more comprehensive with SDG targets, 7 targets plus 3, right? Covering preschool education to higher education and lifelong learning. And I think it's time really for us to think of expanding tertiary education in each country, because basic education is good in get people literate, but when it comes to relevance and the contribution to the economy, I think tertiary education is more relevant. And I'm happy to see that in this region, priorities have been given to the development of TVET and higher education. And this is very much in line with what the report has indicated. And I'm happy that these trends can be keep going. So this is from me, 5 minutes, maybe more, already a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Wang, for sharing with us the growth of higher education, access to higher education in the Asia Pacific region, and for linking it to the presentation of the report that we are launching today. I would like to invite José Antonio Quinteiro, who is EISALC Programs Coordinator for Latin America and the Caribbean. He holds a bachelor's degree in library science and one in law, both from the Central University of Venezuela. He also holds a postgraduate degree in information services management from the Simon Bolivar University and a master's degree in business administration from University of Sheffield. He's currently pursuing a diploma in public policy in education at UNESCO's International Institute for Educational Planning, and his main lines of research are cross-border academic mobility, human rights and their protection, very particularly the right to education under the purview of international and customary law. We would like to invite you to share with the audience, José Antonio, how has access to higher education progressed in Latin America and the Caribbean over the past 2 decades? You will have 5 minutes to answer. Over to you, José Antonio.
Thank you, Sarah. First of all, I would like to greet the audience accompanying us today, and also to this very selected panel. I would like to answer this first question, and I would like to back my intervention up with a PowerPoint that I'm finding troubles to, I know, here it is. Okay, so I'm going to go back to one of the slides that our colleague, Daniele Vieira, presented to us a few minutes ago. Well, as you can see, extraordinary news for the Latin American and Caribbean countries is that we have grown above the world average. And this is very important for us because it will mean improvements in the technical and professional qualifications of our population, and consequently better leverage for the economic and social development of our nation. Having said this, I also compelled to say that this expansion has not equally benefiting all the socio-economic groups of the society. Just let's bring just the case of Peru on the table. As you can see from the graph, you will notice that the progression curve of the lowest quintile, sorry for that, of the lowest quintile is very steady, is very constant. But if you look at the highest quintile, you will see that the curve is much more accelerated, even when there are net gross enrollment in higher education up to 2019. So the key message of this is that certainly all our region has had an extraordinary expansion in the enrollment of higher education. But for example, the case of Peru, I cannot cover all the region in just 5 minutes, but just in the case of Peru, which is a case that we know quite well, only 2 out of 10 students from the lowest quintile access higher education compared to the highest one, in which 5 out of 10 have that privilege. We may also say that this expansion in our region might be facing some turning point or an inflection point with the COVID pandemic. As you can see in this new slide, the net rate of education, of higher education enrollment has been decreased in the second quarter of 2020 for all the quintiles, and this might be an inflection point or a turning point in this progressive expansion that we have recorded throughout these 2 decades. Well, I think I hope to answer this first question with these 2 first slides. I will present others when the new queries and new questions are posed. Thank you.
Thank you, José Antonio, for sharing with us the data for the region. We were expecting to have another guest to speak for a representative, a UNESCO representative for Africa, Abdoulaye Salifu. We think he may be having problems with connections. So we are going to continue around with the representatives that we have that are participating at the moment. And if Mr. Salifu can connect later, then we will proceed to pose the questions to him. So now that we have passed the first question, we would like to go around and ask Dr. Anasse Bouhlal the second question, and this has to do with the drivers and policies that have contributed to the progress in the region, in the Arab countries. So if you could share with us information about what would be the drivers and policies that have contributed to the increase in the progress, we would appreciate it, and you would have also 5 minutes to respond. The floor is yours, Dr. Bouhlal.
I think he has lost connection. because I don't see him in the connection room. So please, Sarah, go. Oh, there he is. Okay, thank you.
So,
Sorry.
were you able to listen to us?
No, I just got the power cut again, and I missed the last sentences from the gentleman who's speaking.
Okay, no, we were about to start with the second question.
Yes.
So we would love you to share with us the drivers and policies that you consider have contributed to the progress of higher access to higher education in the Arab countries.
Yes.
If you please.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Thank you again for your question. And I think my answer is the following. As it has been expressed that the access has been very good factor for this region, and enhance a lot of new universities in the region, as public and also as private ones. This creates also good discussion and need also on the quality assurance system in the region. Therefore, most of the policies have been made are focusing on the quality assurance as the internal and external one. For your information, in this region, which I'm responsible for, we do not have all the countries are having national agencies of quality assurance. UNESCO and in coordination with the member states have been thinking on how to support a lot of countries in the region in establishing their national agencies for quality assurance. Some countries worked on the quality without establishing any national agency, but the others have been also first developing the national agencies of quality assurance. This is an important first remark. The second is the need of the national qualification frameworks in the region. Some countries, as I said, the national qualification framework has been priorities, and some haven't even started or tried to consider the establishment or the design of national qualification framework for their countries. Most specific policies and drivers have been mostly focusing on the national strategies of higher education. I can cite examples, but I will not share the names. Maybe in the discussion we can talk about these things, but the national strategies of higher education in the last 5 years has been in high demand, and helping mostly in getting the universities performing better and establishing good directions where they can go and respond to the huge demand from their societies. Some countries had already their strategies, but they haven't revised the strategy even with all the changes what happened in the societies in the higher education in general. So some countries had been asking and requesting a revision of the national higher education strategies, which I think it was really a timely request. Maybe you can find also similarities with the other regions. Policies on doctoral studies and the research and innovations has been a really very good work in the region and with the ministries of higher education to work on developing policies to promote the doctoral studies in some countries. For your information, and you may also know these things, I think it can be also reflected in your reports that most of the Arab universities are mostly teaching universities rather than research ones. So I think this is important to underline as well. And the recent policies and the drivers is concerning the digital transformation in higher education. So I think the last or the latest policies is the digital transformation in higher education, and the most recent one is the response to COVID-19, and the most recent policy is regional frameworks on the e-learning for the Arab universities, and also its quality assurance for the Arab higher education institution. This is all from my side. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Bouhlal, for your response. We would like to invite Mr. Wang to proceed and to answer the same question, this time regarding to the Asia Pacific region. Mr. Wang, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it's a very good question. I think I agree with all the factors that are mentioned in the book. Actually, economic development, the rise of the middle class, which cause increased demand for higher education, and also the capacity of the whole education institutions is increasing by investing more from the government, but also involvement of the private providers in the delivery of higher education programs, and also, of course, the use of technology, distance education, which is more cost-effective than the real campuses. All these factors are very important in contributing to the expansion of higher education. I think another thing which is really important is that universities are governance at the institutional level. I think there's a change of mentality that used to be rely on government funding to be more, seeking resources from the private sector, and the culture of income generation has also been created in many of the universities in this region, and tuition-free, cost-sharing series has been put into practices. Higher education and tertiary education is no longer free of charge. It's different from compulsory education, and the cost-sharing mechanisms has been developed in many of the countries. I think on top of this, one important thing is the expansion of vocational and professional education rather than academic education. I think it's really a good policy that we do not need many academic education programs, actually, because it's not that relevant to the economic development. And so in many of the countries, expansion is really being the expansion of TVET and professional education, which are market-driven, employment-oriented, which is really making expansion policy, where received by the country, contributing to the economic and social development of the country. And I think another one is really the quality assurance. And as you know, that the university used to be institutional autonomy, quite internal quality assurance is very important. But we have seen increasing regulations on quality from external sources, from the government, from external professional bodies on quality assurance. Recently, we've seen the trends of blended learning to be introduced and mainstreamed as a new normal of teaching and learning in universities. And just last month, Asia Pacific 9 parties to the Tokyo Convention on the Academic Recognition issued a statement calling for member states to recognize online learning, blended learning, recognize qualifications obtained through non-traditional modes. So this is all the things, and I just, as my colleague Anasse was mentioning, qualifications framework is the key, and are very upstream policy tools to keep the system relevant, flexible, and also in line with lifelong learning principles, as we can see that as long as learning outcomes can be comparable, the ways to achieving learning outcomes can be diversified. And we should allow different learning experiences to happen, which can lead to the achievement of the learning outcomes. So this is actually very interesting, and I would like to say that now qualifications framework, differentiation of functions of higher education institutions, development of professional education like architecture education, medical education, engineering education, all these kind of things, and also high vocational and technical education. That will be the key to the expansion, sustainable expansion of the system. We don't need many academic programs. That's for sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wang, for responding to our second question. Now we would like to invite José Antonio Quinteiro to also comment on the drivers that have and the policies that have contributed to the progress in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. Over to you, José Antonio.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, let's start by saying then that one of the drivers is the public funding allocation to higher education that we have perceived during the 90s and in the next decade up to 2009 with the financial crisis. As I said, well, the pandemic of COVID might signify or may be a turning point in this progression of continuous public funding, as our Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean already foresees that our gross domestic product is going to fall around 9.1% in 2020. And these mean that 26 million Latin Americans will fall into poverty. It's important to say that around, in average, 51% of our higher education enrollment is concentrated in the private sector. So students have to pay fees, the students have to repay educational loans, and this portrays a complex scenario in the future. But certainly, public funding during these 20 years in higher education has been an important driver for this enrollment expansion. Then we have we have recorded a sustained growth of the middle class in our region. Even so, and I would like to bring back the case of Peru, 7 out of 10 graduates of the secondary schooling doesn't have higher education yet. So there is a natural growing, a natural demographic growing, or demographical growing, but there is also an enormous amount of prospective students that might be eager to enter into higher education. Another driver that we might identify is that compulsory secondary education is nowadays a reality in most of our Latin American and Caribbean countries. It's important to pinpoint, for example, the case of Mexico, that a few days ago decided to pass onto Parliament a new law for education, and from now onwards, the right to education is well, fully recognized in the Constitution as it was before, but now all the levels of education will be completely free. It is the first nation in America that at constitutional level will guarantee the access and the gratuity of education at all levels. So we can say that the demand for higher education is there, and there are forces that will continue pressing for this sustained growth. Then another driver that we have identified is that a new model of society has already emerged. We left behind the dictatorships that we faced in the 60s and in the 70s. Markets has been liberalized, and the conception of human rights has been also expanded. Most countries have, in some extent or in lesser extent, have embraced human rights, and nowadays the motto of education for all is fully recognized within our region. Then, as another driver that we have identified, is that our regional economy activity is being reorganized. We are leaving behind the first production sector, agricultural production and basic manufacturing industries, in order to embark upon a much more information and knowledge-based economic. So that transition makes that the university and higher education institution all higher education institutions, including the university, are pivotal for this transition. That will be the drivers, and the drivers that we have identified in our Latin American region for such dramatic expansion that we have experienced. Sara, the floor is yours now. Back.
Thank you, José Antonio. We would like to have you now answer the third question of this panel, and it is the following. Thinking ahead, what policies can expand the benefits of higher education, in particular for vulnerable groups? We would like to invite Mr. Anasse Bouhlal to proceed with this question applied to the Arab countries. Over to you, Mr. Bouhlal.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for your question. I think, as we all at UNESCO, we consider that education and higher education especially is a public good. So this is important to underline it, and this brings me to the SDG 4, which is part on 7, related to affordable higher education. So I think the term of affordable, how to make it affordable for the youth in our region is a challenging task to respond to you. And this maybe requires a policy on public and private partnership between those universities in this region. For your information, and then I think you very well know that our region is facing a lot of challenges. Mainly we're talking about the vulnerable groups in the society, and those challenges are mostly linked into the emergency situation or emergencies situation and even war in the region. And I think you know the situation in Syria, you know Iraq, you know in Libya, you know the blast in Beirut. So we are living in a region with a lot of challenges, and of course this affects the access and also the affordability for the vulnerable groups in the region. Mostly when the emergencies are existing, it means, for example, the refugees, as number of refugees in Lebanon have almost 2 million refugees in the country. Also, we think about the internally displaced refugees in Syria. Now we have in Libya. Now we have in Iraq. So, and I think this make situation very, very difficult. Another topic can be also allowing to the access of refugees is the recognitions of the refugees' qualification. And I think this is important to underline it, and it could be also maybe somehow given into the text of the report that's mostly thinking about the refugees' qualifications and its recognition. For example, and I will end at this part, that's for your information regarding the blast what we had in Beirut in August. In this country, we had 39 higher education institutions for a population of 200,000 inhabitants. 31 branches of universities has been damaged, which has reactions on the students' fees, which are increasing, and also at the same time, we have the devaluation of the national currency. The national currency in the country lost its value of 85% against dollars. So it makes even the access to the higher education institutions even more difficult and challenging. Thank you from my side.
Thank you, Mr. Anasse Bouhlal, for sharing with us the challenges facing that higher education, access to higher education is facing in the Arab region. Now we would like to invite Mr. Libing Wang to share his experience for the Asia Pacific region regarding towards the future, thinking ahead what policies can expand the benefits of higher education, particularly for vulnerable groups.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I just want to share with you some of my considerations in some of the policy areas. So first is university admission policy, because we have to choose if it's merit-based or quota-based. I think in this region, we have a lot of examples of quota-based admission policy in order to protect the admission rights of disadvantaged population, which is, but later there was an argument that quota-based is also not fair, and sometimes we need to get it merit-based. But as you know, that the whole education process leading to the admission examination is also not always fair, right? So this is a policy option for us if we need to introduce any affirmative action in terms of admission policies in this country. Secondly, I would like to suggest to have develop some kind of student support system. We have seen many examples of student loan. You have to pay back, but the government should increase their investment in scholarship and also financial support to the domestic as well as international students. To those who cannot afford it, who can really be admitted into universities. And I think this is also another policy area, financing and the third one is really about the relevance and the flexibility of the higher education provision. once it's been increased in this irrelevance and the flexibility, then students, graduates, even without any strong family background, can easily get a job, get a well-paid job, and they can really, because they cannot afford the skills mismatch, and they invest a lot, and then they ended up with skills mismatch, and they are not being unemployed, cannot be on the job. So this is something to do with relevance and flexibility, and this is leading to my third suggestion in policies, which is really the qualifications framework, which are mainly defining the learning outcomes and the way to achieving learning outcomes. And I think this is the main policy tool for academic recognition, credit recognition, transfer, accumulation, leading to micro-credential or even the full qualifications. All these kind of things you can easily accumulate. And we've seen so many good examples in Asia Pacific where the credit bank system is operating very well, which means that you can collect credits from different formal learning, informal learning, and even non-formal learning, which means that the learning is more flexible, which is good for the disadvantaged group. And of course, diversifying funding sources to make higher education sustainable is also another issue. Cost sharing mechanisms between the government, parents, and also the employers is also quite important. I think all these kind of things are really important to expand the benefits of a higher education. Otherwise, skills mismatch will continue, and there with lack of efficiency, relevance, it's a high cost for the countries and also for the students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wang, for sharing these affirmative actions needed for increasing access to higher education. Now we would like to invite José Antonio Quinteiro to share his response to the same question regarding to the region of Latin America and the Caribbean. So José Antonio, could you please share with us the answer to what are the policies that could expand benefits for vulnerable groups? Over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, the first thing we have to say is that the effect of the pandemic will be with us for some years to come. So we have to think in redefining some of the policies that has been very successful in the past, but in this new context. There is today in a foreign newspaper a very interesting article, and the person who is interviewed is a very well authorized voice in Europe, and she said that we have probably lost a decade in the battling of equity and inclusion, both at the school level and higher education level. So we have to bear this in mind because it's really an alarm that we have to consider very carefully at the time that we implement public policies for extra support for the students or for the enhancement of equity policies. I would like also to say as a policy that it doesn't matter what policy is in place, all the actions implemented should have or should be undertaken under the tenet, continue without leaving no one behind. Remember that this is the motto of our Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. In this case, we have to say that online and virtual education poses tremendous disadvantages for the Latin American students. So it's quite important to come back to the person-to-person education, or in the worst of the cases, to the hybrid model. Why? Well, simply because, and I'm going to show you another, simply because we lack connectivity to internet in our region. As you probably know, only 1 out of 2 households in Latin America count with fixed connectivity to internet. I'm going to repeat it. Only 1 out of 2. As you can see from the graph, we are much closer in terms of connectivity to Africa than to the first world. We also have to say that this situation is even worse if we are talking about our students located in rural areas. For example, in the case of Ecuador, this number is even much more dramatic. It's only 1 household with internet, fixed connectivity to internet out of 3. And we also have to bear in mind that 40% of our indigenous populations are located in enclave in rural areas. So this is an important data or fact that we have to bear in mind when talking about policies in terms of access to higher education from now onwards. Also, we have to provide extra support to our risk higher education students. There is a recommendation from the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. They has called it the Cesta Básica Digital, Basic Digital Basket. It is compound of pre-packages for data transmission through cellular phones, laptops, mobile devices, etc., etc. This is more or less something very similar to the contingency measures that has been taken by most of the Latin American universities. So this is an important idea that might be embraced as a policy within our region. Also, it will be important to revise and to enhance equity policies already in place. For example, the policies of affirmative action that has been implemented within our region. At this time, it brings to my mind, for example, la ley de cuotas para afrodescendientes, the quotas for Afro-descendants people in Brazil, by which some number of places were previously reserved for Afro-descendants in federal universities in this huge country. And this program has been proved to be very successful. So that's one to take in time to revise and to improve in the future. There are so many more, but well, we don't have the time to revise them in detail. Another policy that might be implemented, and this belongs to the UNESCO Credo, is that we have to consider the 4 A's. I mean, it's not only access, okay? It's not only the availability of a place for the students within the higher education institution, but it's also about accessibility, acceptability, and adaptability. That's why we the fulfillment of these 4 A's is what really ensures the fulfillment of the right of education. And this is very important for Latin America, but it doesn't help too much to ensure the access to the higher education institution if we don't back up the students with further supporting schemes. We might also say that as we did during the peak of the pandemic, laxity is very advisable, specifically in the recovery of education loans and tuition fees, among many others. As you can see, remember that my colleague Daniele Vieira said that about 31% of the higher education enrollment worldwide was concentrated in the private sector. Well, in the case of Latin America, it's around 51. So if the students cannot pay the fees, we'll be facing a huge dropout of a student from our higher education system. I didn't mention that before, but in the case of Peru, it was my second slide projected. In the second quarter of 2020, and due to the COVID, the country already lost 9% percentage point of student population. So this is very important to be in mind. Also, as a policy, we should implement a mix of them. Each of them has proved to be very successful in different countries according to the context. I particularly like very much the free access, even when there is various opposition to it, because the dropout rates are usually high. But we also have the reduction of demands or reduction of requirements for students who are located in depressed areas. This is a very successful scheme that is being in use in Vietnam and China, and I think it would be very convenient to copy and to implement here in Latin America. Also, we should have quotas for secondary schools that has not been very successful in placing its graduates into the higher education system. This is a program that the University of Costa Rica is implementing, and it has also resulted, or it has proved to be very, very successful. So up to here, my reflections of how to think ahead in terms of achieving universal access to higher education. The floor is yours now, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, José Antonio. We would like to now to open a space for questions from the audience. We have received a few. Some of them have been already responded in the framework of the conversation, of the dialogue. But I'm gonna pose 2 questions to see if who could respond from our guest speakers today. And one has to do to the extent that the COVID-19 pandemic will revert the results of the report of the advances of access to higher education, and what can be done in this regard. The other one is what are some of the reasons why frameworks that advocate for increased access to higher education have not met their targets? I don't know if any of our panelists today would like to take the floor to respond either both or one of these questions. that the audience share with us through the chat, the Zoom chat. If you want to just raise your hand or just open your mic. José Antonio,
Well,
over to you.
I might be willing to, thank you. I might be willing to respond the effect of the COVID on the findings of the EISALC report. As I said, we are expecting a contraction of about 9.1% a fall of 9.1% in our gross domestic product. It means that there will be some scarcity of public funding in higher education in the future. Remember that also the national health system and the social provision system are exercising pressures over the COFERS or the arcas públicas, I don't know how to say that in English, there will be a huge competition for public funding. As the report that Daniele has presented to us, the most probably trend is that the new demand will continue to be covered by the private sector, and this might have some consequences as higher education has always been seen as a social elevator. I don't know how to say that properly in English, but not everybody has the possibilities to enter into the private sector. So that's another concern that we have, and the COVID may bring this on the table and may affect the results of the findings. Also, we have to talk about women in the Latin American region. We have achieved, and this is also excellent news for us, what is called the feminization of higher education. But that's not the case in the STEM careers. And also, in our context, women used to have a double load or workload in terms of assisting their families and and looking after her children. And additionally, they have working loads, and they have the commitments in their duty in her educational training. So the pandemic might affect them in the very first front, in the forefront, and this might be it might be a regression in the gains that we have achieved in these two last decades. This is just how to say that, an scenario that we foresee, and we hope that it will change and it will not become reality. Also, we might say that, well, if the online education persists, there would be tremendous learning lost in some students, especially the most vulnerable populations. Consider that they don't have cognitive support at home, because most of them are the first generation of higher education students. They don't have probably good libraries, and they don't have well-prepared parents in order to make additional support in their education process. So yes, the pandemic will be making tremendous affectations in the findings that the report portrays, and we hope the vaccine will appear soon. We are waiting it as Dios Redentor. I don't say how to say that in English, but we're waiting it anxiously in order to revert the prospective consequences that we are foreseeing. In the case of the primary education, the World Bank already launched a report in which they say that the students facing troubles in reading simple test has passed, because of the pandemic, from 33 million to 44, which is a tremendous jump. And well, it's quite scary that we have that figure in just 6 months. So the consequences still need to be well recorded, but we might predict that without doubt the COVID will be catastrophic effects on our findings. Saying this, Madam Chairman, I pass the word on to you once again.
Thank you, José Antonio. There is another question that we have received. We are gonna share it with our speakers to see if either one of them would like to respond to it. And it says, what policies can help in the enrollment and success of students with the lower secondary school academic preparation? What can be the role of the higher education institutions in this regard? I don't know if either Mr. Libing Wang or Anasse Bouhlal would like to share their opinion or experiences in this regard.
You mean how university can help senior secondary school students to perform well, right? Is this the question?
Yes, students with lower secondary preparation. What can be done from the higher education institutions?
Yeah, I think this question is quite challenging, actually. What we have seen in this region is actually the increasing role of higher education in enhancing the quality of school education, actually. There is a tripartite partnership between universities, schools, and the local education authority. And I know that normally, although they are in the same education system, but sometimes, you know, higher universities and people never communicate with people in junior secondary and senior secondary school. But since we have national qualifications framework, which are connecting different levels and types of learning into one system, I think there's a lot of potentials of universities, you know, helping to raise the standards of secondary school students. I think, of course, you know that the involvement of teacher training and school is not that well developed, but I think big roles, there's a great potentials for the universities to be connecting with secondary schools in the enhancement of quality. I think this is related to teacher training, you know, to you know, many formalities, I think. Thank you. Maybe Anasse can give you more ideas.
Yeah, thank you, colleagues. Regarding this question, I think maybe we should think about the attractiveness of the universities toward the young generation. What makes the universities and higher education institution more attracting those brilliant youth who are in a need to access those universities. This can be done through, as Libing said, the quality mechanisms, and mainly the quality assurance mechanism is very important. Another tool or mechanism is the ranking. So even the ranking at UNESCO is not seen as we see it in other organizations, but the rank of institutes, universities can be also promoting those young secondary school students to be getting a place to the universities. If you allow me, Madam Chairman, to get back to the previous question, I had some reflection on it, on the pandemic effect. In my opinion, we might see the aspects of financial higher education from the public sector will be facing the challenges. And I think this is the government will not have enough money to prioritize, is it the health or the employability or the access to higher education. So, and I think the financial pressure is very crucial nowadays, and in the future coming years, taking in consideration also the economic situation worldwide. Second, we may see a move back from the private universities into the public one, which raise more demand on the access and the acceptability to the public universities. The third reflection is we may see also, as effects of the pandemic, a new way of the mobility of students and teachers. And I think the traditional way of mobility, of course, will go on, but I think a new way, such the virtual mobility, will be placed also in demand. And I think the new European programs as Erasmus, the virtual Erasmus, etc., has been also placed in a place. What's concerning the institutions, and I think it will place also a good evaluations of the learning outcomes. So the e-learning facilities have been introduced, but have the institutions achieved the learning outcomes and work on the achievement of the learning outcomes during the pandemic. And I think here it's a study which is going on in all the regions on the pandemic and also the achievement of the learning outcomes. Last not the least, this is specifically for my region, the e-learning during the pandemic and its adoption and even its recognition is important, because in this region and in some other regions too, the e-learning was not a trustful tools of learning. And now it has been introduced per de facto, but it needs to be given it a trust, and it needs also recognitions. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Mr. Bouhlal, for your responding, and thanks to our guest speakers today for responding to the questions from the audience. We would like now to proceed to close the event with the closing remarks, conclusions from our director, Francesc Pedró, who will share his ideas in the framework of the launching of the report and of the discussion that it took place today. So, Mr. Pedró, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. I mean, it has been really an exciting journey through different regions about how access to higher education has improved, the drivers and the policies. So we drafted a few conclusions that I'm going to share, just using a short presentation, if I can find it. Wait a minute. Here it comes. I think. I'm sorry. Let me see once again. share it again. Yes, here it comes. Okay. Okay. Well, it would be very difficult to say, you know, just a few ideas that provide, in a way, clearance to the many insights that have been shared by our colleagues. I think that we have one clear idea. The first one is that access to higher education has increased dramatically in all regions of the world. And I think that although we are still far from reaching the objective of having universal access, as Libing Wang has explained, we are already in most regions and in most countries in the universal, I would say, or mass higher education provision. I think that this is really important. However, that said, I think that we should not be caught by the trap of thinking that that increase in access has been the result of a move towards more equity. I think, and the study, as well as some of the insights provided by our colleagues, have already insisted on the fact that equity issues still persist. In many respects, I think that the increased access to higher education is the result of having more and more secondary education graduates that come either from the middle class or from the upper class joining higher education institutions. But when it comes to the most vulnerable people, I think that we're still very far away from having the due representation of these groups that is needed to make sure that higher education still works as a democratic option. That said, I think that we have also discussed a lot about what has been the result of the interaction between, on the one hand, it's like a triangle, right? On the one hand, we have growing family and country expectations, meaning by that, for instance, the public discourse about lifelong learning or the public discourse about the knowledge societies and economies insist on the need to have increased numbers of university graduates. At the same time, I think that in every country, the expectations of a family that has already reached father and mother, have already reached the level of secondary education, is to have their children attending universities. I think it's the locomotive effect. I mean, you always expect your children to go farther than you because you wish them well. And I think that this is, on the one hand, what is happening with most regions in the world. I think that the expectations are growing. In many cases as well, despite the fact that the economy works in a cyclical way, the expansion of our economies has resulted as well in more opportunities to finance, as Libing and Anasse have already said, in providing funding opportunities for more young people to attend the university and even to expand the provision of higher education. In some regions, as José Antonio has already shown, I mean, that expansion of higher education provision has counted very much on the private provision, which has been very important, and you know, raising also concerns in some countries. That's why I think that inevitably the question or the issue of quality assurance has been repeatedly mentioned by all the three panelists. But at the same time, I think that responding in some ways to these social expectations and the needs and the opportunities provided by expanding economies, we have seen also the rise of public policies that enable more and more young people to attend university courses. I think that we have here very supportive policies in a number of countries that are already mentioned in the report. Now, does this mean that we don't need to do anything else, that the issue is solved and it's simply a matter of time to reach that level of universal access? Well, I think that we have at least one very important, and I'm just trying to summarize, one very important and pending issue, which is, I think José Antonio mentioned that as well, that increased access does not always correlate with increases or major increases in graduation rates. And I think that this is our most important problem. In countries where, for instance, access to higher education is free of cost, we have seen, the research shows that clearly, that the capacity of the systems and of the institutions to ensure retention and to promote graduation is really, damaged. So in a way, we need to develop policies that not only care for access to higher education, but also to foster the continuity of those new entrants until they reach graduation. I think that it has been mentioned, particularly by Libing Wang, the importance of funding strategies that not only go to the institutions, but also take into account the particular needs of families and students. And I'm glad to say that the Institute is already working on a major comparative study on funding opportunities and mechanisms for higher education students. So we're going to provide probably very soon some results that focus precisely on one of the floating themes that we have had over this discussion, which is the impact of the pandemic. I think that it is important to realize that both governments and institutions, as well as the credit agencies that work to support higher education students, have done massive efforts during the pandemic, still are doing major efforts to ensure that more and more students keep studying. Yet, the big question here is, what is going to happen when we enter a new cycle, just at the beginning of the new fiscal year? I mean, are our economies going to be persistent? Are our economies going to consider still that higher education is a priority? Are they going to expand the efforts to fund, in particular, the most vulnerable students that now are at risk of not returning to our institutions? Well, I think that this is another way of saying how important is in our policy discussions to have not only data, but evidence. And I'm glad to say that the Institute, as well as my colleagues in other regions, we are doing our best to ensure that more and more data are available and that we connect the dots. So we start producing some evidence that is likely to inform policy making both at national and institutional level. One of the probably most important issues that we have when doing analytical work or policy research in the area of higher education is that we miss data. I mean, fortunately, UNESCO has the UNESCO International Institute for Statistics, but capturing statistics, it's something that usually takes at least 1 or 2 years, and that's why we always have that kind of gap. Fortunately, the Institute, as well as other instances at UNESCO, are increasingly using surveys that provide more and more data. I mean, the Institute published just, I think it was 7 days ago, a report on the effects of the pandemic on the research function of the universities. We have already a page devoted to the impact on pedagogical continuity, but we need more and more, because without data, we simply have opinions. And finally, I think that the key message resulting from this overall perspective provided by Daniele and her team, as well as by the panelists, is that the expansion of higher education has to be accompanied by an increased focus on the vulnerable groups. I think that maybe 2 decades ago, among those vulnerable groups, we had gender issues. Now, it looks like before the pandemic, the gender disparity was solved, but now we fear that we are going to have, once again, gender disparities. But that said, there are other vulnerable groups because of their location, because of their ethnic or racial origin, because of their income, that happen to be still excluded from access to higher education. I think that if we do not care for these groups, we risk that the exit strategy of the pandemic results in a key ladder, meaning by that the usual winners are going to be up and up, while the losers and the most vulnerable are going to be down. So the disparities between those who have and those who do not have almost anything except the right to access to higher education, I think is going to be expanding. And I'm going to finish with this key message. I think that when talking about access to higher education, we are talking, as a matter of fact, about the right to education, which is not limited and should not be ever considered limited to compulsory education. I think that the right to education should be seen as a continuous opportunity in a lifelong learning cycle. And that's why, for us, for the Institute, and I guess that for the whole of UNESCO, the right to higher education, or as we say it at the Institute, higher education for all, is simply a declination of the broader right to education for every human being. I think that with that powerful message, let me simply add to that my, once again, my gratitude to the panelists for the excellent and time-limited, I think, interventions. I think that the participants, the audience, appreciated, as I did, I guess, very much how concise they were, and how fast it went. I think I would like very much this to be continuity in another opportunity. So I guess we're going to have many more in the future. And also, I would like to reiterate my deepest gratitude towards Daniele, Jaime, and Taku for the excellent work done with this report, as well as to the supporting services, including Sarah Maneiro, Neus, Edward, and so many others that from the Institute have contributed to this major achievement. Once again, please stay tuned, because I think that soon you are going to see us again, moving the waters when it comes to other important issues in higher education. Thank you very much, and back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Director, for your closing remarks. We would like now to go to finalize our session of today. And first, we would like to thank all the guest speakers that participated in today's webinar for accompanying us. Also, the work team, on behalf of our director and of our work team at UNESCO IESALC, we would like to thank the attendees for staying with us during these 2 hours. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, Chilean visual translator Fran Solomon accompanied today's webinar to turn it into visual diagrams for a better understanding of the conclusions of the event. These diagrams, as well as the report launched today, can be accessed on UNESCO IESALC website and via our social media. We invite you to visit the website esalc.unesco.org for accessing to these materials, including both versions of the report in English and Spanish that we are also sharing through the chat as we speak. And other than that, we invite you to stay connected with us. We have all the reports that our team mentioned before hang on our website, available for all of you. And also you can connect with us through our website and our social media. So we once again thank you all for being with us, and it will be until the next time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to the designer. It's really impressive.
Really,
Thank
really
you.
nice.
Thank
Sarah.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, colleagues. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm still here to see the.
We will share it with you, Daniele.
Okay.
It's impressive.
Yes,
It's
very
so
nice.
nice.
The ability she has of just translating visually, it's Fran, congratulations.
Yes.
Yes. Thanks
Excellent
so much.
job.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It's really impressive. Okay,
Yeah.
colleagues, thank you very much. I think it has
the-
been really, yes, go ahead, Sarah, please, go ahead.
No, the drawing will be also available in Spanish for our Spanish audience. That's what I wanted to say.
Yes, no.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very
Thank you
much.
so
I think it
much.
has
Bye
been
bye.
really impressive. Thank you very much, José Antonio, Daniele, Sarah, and Neus, and Edward, who have been in the background. I think that this is really, it's a nice way of seeing the results of our work. So,
Yeah.
very nice, very nice. Congratulations to France again. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Francesc.
Bye.